Stay with me for a moment because this title is not just a good title, it is exactly the question a lot of people have right now. Did Trump change everything, or are we only now seeing the effects of a fire that was already burning and has finally reached the surface? When people hear Israel, Iran, and Dubai in the same sentence, the first reaction is to think they are three separate news stories. But if you look closely at the rhythm of events, the political reactions, and the effects in aviation, trade, and security, you begin to see something else. These are not three stories, but one single chain that has caught fire. And this is exactly where Trump enters the equation, not just as a big name that attracts attention, but as a factor who can accelerate, cool down, or complicate a crisis through a single statement, a single decision, or even through the way he publicly interprets an already explosive situation. The problem is that very many people look at these crises as isolated images. An explosion here, a statement there, an affected airport somewhere else, and everything seems chaotic, without logic. But major crises do not work like that. They work like a system of tense wires, and when you pull one of them, all the others move. So in this episode, I do not want only to tell you what happened. I want to show you how the pieces connect, and why exactly the combination of Trump, Israel, Iran, and Dubai can change the atmosphere in the region within a few hours, not a few months. Let's start from what people feel first, not from what they understand first. People feel fear, confusion, and urgency when they see images from a place like Dubai, because Dubai is not perceived as a front line, but as a symbol of stability, money, flights, and control. When a city like Dubai enters a day of regional tension, the psychological impact is huge. Even if some information is still being verified, the simple fact that the city's name appears in the context of attacks, explosions, or disruptions instantly changes global perception. And here something must be said very clearly. In such moments, it is not only the event that matters, but also the narrative that forms around it in the first hours. If the narrative becomes, everything is getting out of control, markets react, people react, companies react, governments react. And sometimes the reactions to the narrative produce almost as much impact as the event itself. Now, where does Trump enter this whole story? He enters exactly at the place where politics, military force, and public perception meet. Trump is the kind of political actor who does not participate passively in a crisis. He redefines it through language, through positioning, and through the ability to move the world's attention from what happened to who controls the next move. That means that, regardless of whether we are talking about a direct decision, a public reaction, or pressure on alliances, his mere involvement changes the rhythm. And in geopolitics, rhythm matters almost as much as power, because a slow crisis can be negotiated. A crisis accelerated by rhetoric, pride, and contradictory messages can get out of hand before diplomacy even reaches the table. That is why the question in the title is so powerful. Did Trump change everything? Does not mean only Trump is to blame or Trump decided alone, but rather, did he change the dynamics in a way that ignited the chain faster? To understand the chain, you need to see the logical order. At the center of the tension you have the Israel-Iran relationship, meaning the military and political core of the escalation. Around this core you have states and hubs that are not necessarily a direct front, but that absorb the economic, logistical, and psychological shock. This is where Dubai comes in, and more broadly, the Gulf area. And above all these pieces you have the actor who can push the balance in one direction or another through military power, alliances, and political signals. This is where America enters, and when you say America in this equation, you inevitably also say Trump. Now, why do I say a chain caught fire and not just a conflict? Because the effects did not remain in one combat zone or in a single capital. Signals began to appear in places that, for the global public, mean normal life. Airports, routes, trade, tourism, transit, markets. And the moment these zones begin to be affected, the crisis becomes real for people who do not follow geopolitics daily. A person may ignore a military map, but they cannot ignore a cancelled flight, a suspended route, a news report about tensions at a hub they use, or a sudden rise in anxiety in the markets. That is Dubai's power in this story. Not only that it is an important place, but that it is a barometer that tells the world how far the shockwave has reached. And here appears one of the most important things we need to understand. When you see Dubai in the equation, it does not necessarily mean that it is the center of the conflict, but that it becomes proof that the effects of the conflict have passed beyond the first circle. In other words, we are no longer talking only about two states striking each other, and that is all. We are talking about a regional and global system that is beginning to feel pressure. Now let's talk about the political mechanism, because here a lot of people oversimplify too much. People say either Trump solves it or Trump makes it worse, but reality is more complicated and more interesting. A leader like Trump can change three things at the same time. He can change the calculation of allies, he can change the calculation of adversaries, and he can change the calculation of the American domestic public. If allies feel that Washington will go further than they expected, they become either more courageous or more cautious. If adversaries feel that the signals are unpredictable, they may test the limits or, on the contrary, react more aggressively out of fear that time is not on their side. And the American public matters enormously, because any major external crisis inevitably returns into domestic politics. That is where it is decided how much room a president has, how much support he has, how much resistance he meets, and how quickly the tone changes. That is why when you say Trump's involvement here, you are not talking only about a name in a title, you are talking about a multiplier of tension, pressure, and political speed. Now let's come down to the level where the public feels the crisis the fastest. Flights, airports, routes, and commercial flows are among the first places where you see the truth of an escalation. Diplomacy can speak in ambiguous phrases. Aviation, logistics, and markets speak in concrete decisions. If operators suspend, reroute, delay, or shut down, that tells you something that cannot be polished over. It tells you that perceived risk has grown enough that systems which live on predictability have begun to defend themselves. And this is exactly where Dubai becomes a perfect symbol for our episode. Because Dubai is not just a map, it is pure infrastructure, pure speed, pure connectivity. When connectivity starts to tremble, the public instantly understands that this is not just a dispute of statements. It is a crisis that has begun to touch the mechanisms through which modern life functions. Another very big trap appears here, and I want to say it directly. In moments like these, the internet produces two extremes, either total panic or total denial. Some say, it is over, we are entering a regional catastrophe. Others say, it is nothing, it is just the media exaggerating. Usually both sides miss what is essential. The truth in major crises often sits in a more uncomfortable zone. It is neither calm nor apocalypse, but a sequence of moves and reactions that can go in both directions depending on the next decisions. And this is exactly where this episode has to be useful, not just intense. We are not interested in guessing the future, but in understanding which signals show whether the chain is breaking or whether it is catching fire even more. The first signal is the political tone. If messages become harsher, more personal, and more ultimatum-like, the risk of escalation rises even without a new major event. The second signal is the behavior of infrastructure. If aviation, transport, and major economic actors continue to defend themselves or even expand their measures, it means they expect volatility, not rapid calming. The third signal is the response of alliances. When partners begin to speak differently, distance themselves, call for restraint, or publicly reposition their messages, it means the political system is trying to absorb the shock. And perhaps most importantly, the fourth signal is the way the narrative changes in public opinion. If people no longer ask, what happened, but what comes next, it means we have moved from the news stage into the crisis stage. And that is exactly the stage in which our title becomes relevant. Because the question is no longer only whether Trump changed something, but how much he changed the trajectory, and whether that trajectory can still be controlled. There are people who believe everything depends on one single person. That is not true. There are also people who believe leaders do not matter, that systems run by themselves. That is not true either. The reality is that systems create pressure, and leaders decide in which direction that pressure flows. In a tense moment, a leader can open an exit or can turn a crack into a rupture. That is why, in the Israel-Iran-Dubai combination, Trump is not just an external actor. He becomes part of the mechanism that can amplify or temper the chain, and there is something else worth saying very clearly for anyone who follows episodes like this. The biggest mistake is to look at each day as if it were a final verdict. Major crises are not decided in a single headline and not in a single night either. They are decided through accumulation, through errors, through emotional reactions, and through moments when someone chooses between pride and control. That means what we are seeing now may be either the beginning of a harder stage or the moment when all actors realize how close they have come to the edge. And the difference between those two directions will be determined by the signals in the next hours and days. And this is exactly where I want you to keep the central idea of the episode. Do not look at Dubai only as the scene of a moment of panic, and do not look at Trump's name only as a click magnet. Look at them together as two different indicators of the same crisis. Dubai shows you how far the shockwave has reached, and Trump shows you how quickly its direction can change. That is why our title is not only dramatic, but logical. Did Trump change everything? How the Israel-Iran-Dubai chain ignited is, in fact, an invitation to see the connection that most people miss when they consume news in pieces. And if you stayed until this point, it means that is exactly what you are looking for. Not just breaking news, but meaning. Not just powerful images, but the explanation that connects them. That is what we will keep doing. We follow the real signals, separate facts from noise, and look at what happens next without panic, but without naivety. Because sometimes history does not explode at a single point. Sometimes it ignites like a chain, and if you do not see the connections, you see only the fire and completely miss the direction in which it is moving.